Hello, WordNerds! Happy Sunday. It is July 18th at the time of broadcasting this. We're going to be talking all about subplots today. It's going to be a really interesting chat, I think. We were talking a little bit about what even is a subplot, what qualifies in the pre-chat. And this is a workshop format. So if you've never watched one of these before, the way it works is we'll have a little slideshow, try and delve really deeply into what makes a strong subplot and how you can apply that to your own work. And then we're going to have some exercises as well to try and help you be able to implement it in your own story. I've tried my very best to make the exercises apply no matter what stage of the writing process you are in, whether you're drafting or revising or plotting. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. We had some new faces last week, so I just wanted to give a quick hi. We're the WordNerds. There's like 9 of us who are technically WordNerds, but 5 of us here on any given Sunday. We have a lot of writing credentials combined. We've got Rachel, who works very closely with publishers, knows all things books, has a very big TikTok, a model who's read.
Oh, thank you.
We've got Kelly.
I'm ready for this promotion.
We've got Kelly here, who is a master of all things productivity, creativity. She's published like 700,000 books. And
at least, sure.
Yeah. She also runs the website tasklins.com, which is in its beta format? Is that what you'd call it right now?
Probably, but yes.
In alpha testing.
It's a work in progress.
It's super fun though. Tasklins.com. We've got Emma, who is a librarian. Kyra, who is a freelance editor and has 700,000 linguistics degrees. And you've got me. I'm Megan. I have gotten very close to being traditionally published multiple times and am exactly where I was 7 years ago. But I've also interned at a literary agency. And so yeah, we know things sometimes. So you can sort of trust us when we speak about writing, and we all read a lot.
Megan is the glue that makes all of this work, and she's the only one that can pull off workshops to the level of detail that she does. The rest
Absolutely.
Doctor has read so many craft books.
I've read a lot of craft books, and that is where most of the material comes from, because I do feel like all of writing advice is just writers parroting advice that they've heard that works for them. Like so little of writing is actually trying something that you've never heard of anyone doing before. So the books that I refer to the most in this chat are The Anatomy of Story by John Truby, which is going to get a reference. I also went through Self-Editing for Fiction Writers by Rennie Brown and Dave King for a little bit of the data. And then I don't have a copy of this book because I got it from the library, but I also majorly used the book Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot. And I've got links to at least 2 of those. I might have forgotten Self-Editing, so I'll put that one in after. But I've got links to more info on those down in the description box. There's also links to the slides we're going to be using today and a link to the transcript that if you open it, I'm in there right now. We are following it pretty closely, word for word. So yeah, let's jump right in. Also, one last housekeeping thing. Feel free to ask any subplot related questions or anything you want us to discuss in the discussion box, and we will try to address it live. Also, feel free to share your own experiences as well. Not everyone's experience writing is universal. What works for me might not work for you. So if you share what does work for you, then you might be able to help another writer whose experience doesn't match ours. And we love hearing what you guys are doing as well. So first question for chat participants, what do you think makes a good subplot?
I don't know. My brain is melting at this whole topic. Just looking at the Goodreads books I've read, I've read too many things that aren't structured traditionally this year. So I'm looking at things and being like, I don't know, Were there subplots? I have no idea. So
I think it would be like minor things that feed into the main plot, but are not, I don't know, like that, like don't follow it, or that are like not the same as it, if that makes sense.
Or I guess, yeah, kind of related mine, I think things that aren't necessarily the main plot, but they contribute to the same things, right? So if you have a character who is trying to learn to trust people again after betrayal, and that's kind of like their big emotional arc, like you'll have your main plot, but then you can have like subplots in which they're also doing that on a smaller scale. And then it'll come together nicely in the end. Like you see that it's all like been leading them to this place of emotional development.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. I think like good subplots enhance either like the main plot or like the main character's development in some way, whether it's by like building on it or like reflecting or like something being like an opposite. Can be a good way to do a subplot too, but it has to in some way like enhance what you're doing, or else what's the point of it?
How, but I got like stuck on thinking about like the Harry Potter series because we use those for examples a lot, and like getting into basically anything Ron and Hermione did of like spew or Ron's love life, or like were these good? I don't know. Like it's just they were there and they grew side characters in a way that just because it's all Harry all the time was harder to do. So, but they did not contribute to the main plot.
I think in those regards, it's things that broaden the world or show kind of gaps in your protagonist. Like, oh, the protagonist doesn't care about this. Does that show a lack of morality in that regard? Does it show that like the secondary characters aren't going to be around to help because they're focused on other things? Yeah, it's such a strange balance, I feel like, because it has to be perfectly interesting that it doesn't feel like it's distracting from the main conflict, but not so interesting that you don't care about the main conflict.
Yeah. I think they definitely can be used to add maybe some intensity to the main plot. So specifically what I'm thinking of is like Spider-Man. And a very common Spider-Man storyline is that he's obviously fighting some villain who's trying to like destroy New York or whatever it is the villain's doing that week. But then in the background, you always have this like subplot with him that's like he's running late for school, or he's trying to like, you know, get to work on time. Like, so he has like all these like little life subplots that are going on in the middle of trying to like save New York City. And I think that kind of like amps up the tension, because it's like logically I know that Peter Parker like missing his chemistry test is not as important as New York City being turned to dust. But I still care about it, right? And it's like, oh man, even if he can pull off this saving the city thing, he's definitely getting a failing grade in chemistry. I don't see how he can do both. And then when he does do both, it's extra cool.
I think like Kelly bringing up like all the like little things in Harry Potter kind of brings up what we talked about a little bit in pre-chat, which is like what constitutes a subplot. And especially in fantasy novels, because they're usually like really long and complex, you get varying levels of subplots. So something like Hermione and Spew, like that's like sort of a subplot, but there isn't like a rising tension and like there isn't an actual like story arc to it really. It's really, it's there to like build her character and do some world building. So I think you sometimes have like those like little tiny things that are just there to like build on the world or a character. And then you have like the actual subplots that like have like an actual arc to them, like Ron and Hermione's relationship drama or something,
something that earns the term plot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, like Kelly and I were talking about this a little bit in the pre-chat of like having like a hierarchy of subplots. Mm-hmm. So you can have like, okay, let's say fantasy action adventure. You know, we're going off to save the world, or we have to go find a gemstone and save the world. So like you're doing all the things to like go find that thing, but then also maybe your main subplot is a romantic subplot. So like, yeah, we're trying to save the world, but we're like also trying to fall in love. But then maybe your other like minor subplot is like your character gets injured halfway and now has to deal with that. Or maybe there's another minor subplot of like they run out of money and they have to go and like take a job somewhere to like get some coins to like keep going. So like you have like a different, like
Yeah,
depending
it's
on how much you like
complicated.
develop it, it could be like at
Yeah.
a bunch of different levels.
Especially with like different types of story structure, because the other example I was trying to like work through was Game of Thrones, but like so many of those subplots ended up being plot. You just didn't see it for 4 books. That it
Yeah.
just kind of, well, I don't know why we're doing this thing, but it seems important.
It's like in those books in the show, like it's almost like all the little subplots create the main plot. You know, like yeah, they're all building towards similar things.
Yeah, yeah. So let's bust out these slides. We've talked a lot about this already. For the sake of this chat, when we're talking about subplots, we're talking about storylines, so lines that have an arc that are not the main plot, but they may tie into the main plot. They're primarily used to add complexity to your story, and they should exist to support your main conflict, not detract from it. For example, Faramir in Lord of the Rings, a relatively minor character, but who has a definitive arc. He wants his dad to be proud of him, but throughout the course of his story, his time in the plot, he learns to have confidence and believe in himself, which leads to him occasionally interacting with the main plot, like him kidnapping and releasing Frodo and Sam. And because he did that and decides to release them, he is then set into a path that makes him cross paths with Aragorn and the gang. And he's able to provide information to them at a time when they're feeling hopeless. Be like, oh yeah, I saw those hobbits. And for the most part, he's just doing his own thing. But he does have this whole life, it feels like. So yeah, we're going to move right into a warm-up exercise. What are your subplots?
That's how I feel when I'm plotting. Every time.
That's how I feel just thinking about this topic.
So we're going to take 5 minutes. And because it's a workshop, the minutes themselves don't matter. So it's just going to be from the time we say go. So yeah, write down the subplots that you know exist in your story or that you would like to have exist in your story in the future. Think about things like which characters would they involve? Just the basics, you know. So we are going to go until the 53 because the minute's about to cross over. And yeah, so check in then and go. time. Okay, let me pull down this for just a second. I always get so paranoid when switching to the next slides. Okay, so with all discussions of writing on this channel, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, there's no such thing as one right way to write a book. That being said, there are general conventions to writing a novel, and it's useful to know those conventions. That way, if you decide, hey, I'm not going to do this, then you can do it intentionally, and you can make sure that in that intention, you are doing things to make sure that it is as strong as it can be. That being said, do you need that subplot? 2 to 3 subplots is most often a solid number to aim for. And that's like subplots, like we mentioned earlier, that have a full arc to them. If you have less than that, you might face criticism that your plot is flat. And if you have more than 3, you are more likely to face criticism that it doesn't feel fleshed out enough because there's too much going on. Again, your mileage may vary. There are things you can do to mitigate these things, but that's the general convention. So yeah, there are a lot of different purposes that subplots can serve. In a subplot, you could create or dissolve relationships. You could develop secondary characters or the antagonist. You can leave clues to a mystery or provide tools that your character might need in the climax. It can also add a dose of reality, or it can be used to explore your novel's themes, which I think I saw, and Griswold said something like that. Yeah. And Griswold said when it explores different aspects of the theme and ties directly to the main plot. I think we talked about this a little earlier with the dose of reality, but this is something you see a lot in contemporary novels or novels that take place in the real world. Often adding a dose of reality in young adult scenarios would be a school subplot. Like, we have to get to chemistry class. I know we're Spider-Man, but we also have to get to chemistry class. Subplots, they can run parallel to your main conflict for most of the book, or they can be dipping in and out throughout the story. Regardless of which path you choose to take, they must interact with the main plot in some way by the end of the book, or else it's a separate book. You have written 2 books if they don't meet. So question for you guys, do you have a certain type of subplot that you find yourself writing the most? Is there something that reappears a lot in your books?
Always a romance subplot.
Yeah, usually.
I always romance out of obligation, I think. Like, most things I always feel like it's supposed to be there, but family would be the one for me.
I also like complicated friendships, like when there's like friendships that are like falling apart for some reason, or like conflict in a friendship is always fun for me to do.
Yeah, I really like creating, like, I mean, I like doing the romance too, but like really any sort of relationship. So like fun platonic relationships, building like unlikely friendships or whatever. I think I do also really like the dose of reality, because for me, there's something so fun about that juxtaposition of like, the world is ending, but also chemistry, you know, like I think there's room to have a lot of fun there. So I do like writing that sort of thing too.
I do think family plots play into YA very similarly to like school ones of like, can't save the world, your mom won't let you leave the house, of like those kind of things tend to come up. So
yeah, I write a lot of horror. And one of my favorite subplots to add in horror is things are going missing suspiciously. Let's figure out what's the deal with that. Is it a monster? Is it something else? We had a comment from Missy Kate who said, this is going to take me way more than 5 minutes, which I suspected it might for some people, which is why exercise 2 just kind of builds on the last exercise. So yeah, you're going to take another look at those subplot notes you've got going on. What kind of subplots are they? Write down any instances that you can think of where each subplot could intersect with the main plot. So this is just kind of time to develop those ideas even more. Do we think maybe 10 minutes? Yeah?
Sure.
10 minutes. We'll start it at the 59, which will give us like 50 seconds to prepare. So yeah, we'll go from the 59 to the 09. We've got some really good comments. I think after this exercise, I'll go through and make sure we're not missing anything. If you ask a question and I deliberately don't answer it, it's because we're going to talk about it later. So yeah, we've had a lot of really great comments.
Such an interesting topic. I suspect we'll end up doing like a discussion-y chat about it in the future as well.
For sure. Vanessa earlier asked, what are some examples of things in subplots? And just let me know in the discussion section, Vanessa, if our last list answered that question or if there's something you'd like us to go more in detail on. And with that, it's go time. Check in 10 minutes. And time. Okay. How's everyone feeling about subplots?
I love them, but I don't love mine. Mine
Big
needs some work.
mood.
Yeah, mine needs some work.
We had a comment from Stephanie that said, I have an umbrella plot of who's attacking us and why, and then 2 main characters who each have their own core plots that will eventually answer the umbrella plot. I love that. Stephanie also said, I like subplots that are driven by side characters. So you are in luck because our next topic is actually character-led subplots. We had subplot recommendations from people in the comments. Matthew Berry said family conflict that can be a motivator for the protagonist. Vanessa V said subtle tension.
I think I am particularly biased to subplots that expand world building because I love like hardcore fantasy books. So I'm like, yes, let's go on a random adventure to this like new continent, or like, oh, we got some archives to explore. Let's do that for, half the book. I'm down for that.
Yeah. Question I had for you guys. How do you decide that a secondary character is interesting enough to warrant having their own subplot?
I don't decide.
Like,
No, I don't decide. The character shows up and they demand one. I start writing them and they just take over. That's my process.
So the most fun characters.
Yes.
I think it's like how much that side character impacts your main character, or alternatively, how much they will impact your main character later. So like you could maybe have a character who has like a couple lines in the beginning of the book, but then by the end of the book, oh my god, they're actually the villain. And so like working on them might, or like making the main character do something that's like parallel to what they're doing, and then being like reveal at the end, that could be kind of cool. But also it's just like a friend character who's there to be like, wow, you're so great. Then I'm like, I don't need to develop you very much.
One way to look at it is that idea of like no side character thinks of themselves as a side character. So if you look at like, okay, if they're the protagonist of their own story, is there something their own story is doing that is important to your story or your main character, or is that going to develop something in some way of like, if they were the book, what would the side plot be that intersects with your book?
Yeah. And Griswold had a really interesting comment kind of in that same vein. That said, when I ask myself, am I writing a book about the wrong character? Which I think is so interesting to think about. Like, they're so fleshed out that if you wanted to, you could tell a story from their perspective. And then just have to make the call that, like, that's not the story I'm trying to tell here, and it doesn't fit the main conflict or theme that I'm going for. That's really interesting. Did anyone else have any character subplot thoughts before we move in?
We Megan and I, when we were, because Megan and I write books together, if you're new here,
Have
if
you
you're not
heard?
new here, you know this and you're tired of us talking about it. But that's actually something we did this week, is we were talking about one of our non-POV characters, who isn't really a side character, he's a main character, but I think I actually said, like, I kind of wish we could be in his head sometimes.
And sometimes with the right book, if it's like third person or you only got one POV character, there can be instances where it's okay to give like a lesser point of view chapter or series of chapters to a character. So yeah, if you're struggling, I know a lot of times we'll have people come into the comments of our chats when we're talking about plotting and be like, I don't know how to manage my subplots, or I feel like I need subplots, but I don't know where to find them. And so for those people, if you're struggling to come up with subplots, I would highly recommend considering John Truby's four-corner opposition theory. So again, that's from The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. I put a link to more info about this book in the description box. So it's this idea that If you add 2 secondary opponents, i.e. subplots, in addition to your main antagonist, you can add a lot of depth and complexity to your story. He recommends each character takes up a different corner of a box, and they all represent different challenges, both to the main character and to each other. So he has 5 things that he recommends if you're going to be using 4-corner opposition. Number 1, each opponent should use a different way to attack the main character's weakness. And he uses the word attack, but this doesn't necessarily mean it has to be an actual altercation. One of these opponents could be a friend to your character who has a slightly conflicting goal, or the same goal but a different idea about how to achieve that goal. Like, these opponents don't necessarily have to be villains, all of them. Number 2, each character should be in conflict, not just with the main character, but with each other as well. Your characters all exist in the same world, and if your subplot characters are only interacting with your main character and seem to not have any clue about each other, it's going to feel one-dimensional. It's going to feel like they are set dressing for your main character. Number 3 is to put the values of the 4 characters in conflict. Truby mentions the idea that your character's core beliefs mean basically nothing if they don't come up against conflicting beliefs at any point. Number 4, push the characters to the corners. This means make your characters as different as possible from each other for peak conflict. And 5, extend the 4-corner pattern to every level of the story. Beyond characters, you can create this same kind of opposition within a society, an institution, a family, or even through one character's internal conflict. This is often seen in larger, more sweeping stories like fantasy novels. Again, I have put a link in the description for John Truby's book to learn more about it. Now we're going to move into the next exercise, character-led subplots. Analyze the characters involved in your subplots. Be sure to dig beyond the superficial. How do characters in your subplots relate to each other? What parts of the protagonist do they reflect or oppose? And what do they tell you about the theme of your book, if you know what the theme of your book is? What do they tell you about the main character or about the antagonist? So let's take another 10 minutes, yeah? We'll start now because the minute just switched over, so check in at the 27. and time. We had some really good comments that I'm going to go over really quickly before moving on. Matthew Berry pointed out world political conflict can also interfere with a character's journey. Definitely external. We haven't even brushed on external things that could be a subplot, you know, political conflict, climate conflict. Those are all things that aren't necessarily the main plot, but could be very drastically affecting the main plot as those things go alongside it. We also had a question from Missy Kate. Is the term subplot and plot lines the same thing? And can a secret be considered a subplot? I personally use them pretty interchangeably. I don't know if that's right or wrong.
But I think a subplot is a plot line.
Yeah.
Like, you know?
But not all plot lines are subplots.
Yes, exactly.
Because you could have the major plot line or the main one.
Mm-hmm.
The square rectangle thing, you know.
Exactly.
And I think a secret can be a subplot if something is making that secret, like if something gives it an arc, you know, is someone trying to keep it secret, and is that secret coming out gonna drastically affect the way the characters interact with each other and all of that, then I think it could definitely be a subplot.
Or is your character trying to like uncover a secret? Or something?
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to move into talking point number 4 on my list, which is pacing your subplots. This is the one I'm most excited about, this is the reason I wanted to do a subplots workshop. Earlier this year, I read Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot by Jane Cleland. And my favorite part of the book was when Jane talked about plot pacing. She's a suspense author by trade and discussed how an engaging plot has twists, which fall under 3 categories, which I'm going to go over now to provide context for the next thing. Add that. So 3 kinds of engaging plot twists. A twist, which is an incident that takes the story in an unexpected direction. So, for example, Sam Gamgee is eavesdropping under the windowsill. Now he's getting added to the mix. He's going to go with a twist. Reversal, an incident that takes the story in an opposite direction from where it's headed. So, we wanted to go on the mountain. Gandalf wanted to get there through the mountain, but it's too cold, so now we have to go through the mines, which is what Gimli wanted to do. They literally have to turn around. And then a moment of heightened danger, which adds tension through a moment of fear, which can be physical or mental. For example, Ringwraiths crossing the Hobbit's path on the way to Bree. I've put a link to learn more about that book down in the description box. If you want to read more about that book, I'm not going to go too deep into plot twists themselves, since this is just a subplots workshop, but definitely check out her book if you want to read that more in depth. Like I said, I went over it mostly so we could talk about this chart, which I am obsessed with. And yeah, I'm just a huge fan of like demystifying the storytelling process and trying to show like what makes a story unputdownable, what makes a story feel tightly paced. And for Jane, it is this chart. It is get caught up on my notes.
This feels like such a peak Megan moment.
I'm so amped right now.
And then Megan fell in love with the chart.
Yeah. A twist everyone was expecting. So Cleland argues that for a plot to feel tightly paced, you need a TRD, twist reversal, or moment of heightened danger, every 70 pages, and an alternating subplot moment every 40 pages. And your mileage may vary. If your book is longer and a little slower paced, you might want to spread these out just a little bit. If it's a shorter book, maybe it's a novella, or you're doing like a super action-packed thriller, maybe you want to tighten these up more. But the general idea is if you have these subplots alternating at approximately these points, your reader is always going to remember them. It's never going to feel like a subplot came out of nowhere. And then when they tie in at the end, because they do all tie in at the end around page 280, when the climax is happening, your reader is going to think, oh, yes, I've been seeing this happening. I've been experiencing all of this. Nothing is surprising to me here. So yeah, I am just such a fan of this idea. I've been using it in my plotting lately. So I thought I would share it in case that might work for you all.
I'm
But I
gonna
do
like
think
print this out and stick it on my
Right.
wall and just stare at it all the time.
Yes.
It's like I'm so bad with the
Pacing
pacing. Of,
subplots is so hard.
yeah, I
Mhm.
forget them, and then I'm like, oh damn, it's been like 50 pages and I haven't mentioned this thing. I probably should throw that in there, and then it just feels super start stop.
Yeah. Jane Cleland actually has this picture on her website. So I'm going to get that and put it in the discussion section now.
No, I think I'm just gonna take a screenshot of this and just post this chat screenshot on my wall, and so
Love it.
we can
our
see all your
pictures.
faces. It's like you're, it's like you're cheering me on.
Yeah. Well, if anyone doesn't want our faces on the one you print out,
And why are you here?
so yeah, and in that site link that I just put in the discussion section, Jane breaks this down even more. Again, it's really great. I am obsessed with it, as you can probably tell. So moving on, these things, when you have these subplot moments, they don't necessarily have to be an entire scene dedicated solely to the subplot, but the subplot needs a mention. And yeah, again, just having it happen like this makes it unforgettable. So we had some comments about Lord of the Rings. Yes, Gandalf didn't want to go through the mines because of the Balrog, but because of the mountains, they didn't have a choice, unfortunately. But fortunately for Gimli, who thought it was going to be a great time at that time.
I just
He
found
thought-
out. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just say I just found out that my library has mastering plot twists. So I'm gonna go
Yes.
check that out.
When Megan said if you want to check out that book and learn more about it, I thought she was talking about Lord of the Rings.
You guys gotta check out Lord of the Rings.
You may have
recommend-
heard of this little
It's
known
kind of an
fantasy novel.
underhyped book. So yeah, we're going to move into exercise 4, and then we've just got one section afterwards. Subplot pacing. Have you referenced your subplots recently? Figure out where you should include your next subplot related scene and begin working on it. So you can adapt this whether you are plotting, if you're drafting or revising, just kind of adapt it to whatever's going to work best for you. If you're pantsing, you can just say, okay, well, how long has it been since I mentioned it? Do I need to mention it in my next scene? And yeah, let's go now for 10 minutes because I'm running us a little long. So we're going to go right now. Check in at the 45. And time. All right. Let me double check the comments. We had Penumbra Mind said, I like it when the subplot reveals the upcoming major plot twist, but you don't realize it until you, as the reader, are already there. That is the best.
Mhm.
Yes. And Griswold said, in reference to timing out all of the subplots, so the reader will feel the outcome was inevitable. And I think in a way, yeah, in a good story, there is a feeling of inevitability, even if you're surprised by how it turned out. There is a feeling of, oh, of course, it was leading to this. Storytelling Snick said, I find making a list of characters and their subplots and arcs helps keep track of things, also writing them down for sure. The Shadows Lair said, my cat shut my computer off. And Matthew said, cats can be great conflict generators. So true.
Earlier when I had to shut my camera off, it was because my cat came in and started yelling at me. So we had to do a very quick feeding and
subplot, if you will.
come back, yeah. And
so
subplot of my cat's life is just constantly bothering me.
So our last thing of the evening, I wanted to talk a little bit about learning to self-edit subplots. Most of us, when we get asked the question of like, how do I know if something's wrong? The answer is typically get a beta reader and they'll tell you if something is wrong. But I do think there are ways that you can look at the plot that you have and diagnose some problems yourself before moving in. Because most of us do a round of edits before sending our book to someone. So do you guys have anything in particular that you do to help you diagnose problems with your subplots?
I feel like this is going to be something NovelPad is going to be very helpful with for me, but I haven't actually done it yet, so hard to recommend.
Yes, I feel like I always miss, I know this is like writing subplots and like foreshadowing stuff for, again, when everything comes together at the end. I feel like I said before, I totally forget that I have subplots, and then I kind of have to go back and like write them into the story. So that's like, I think I don't know. That's like honestly how I write a lot of subplots. Is that I forget that I wanted to do them until too late. And I'm like, well, I guess I'll just go back and write it in.
Same. Same. Especially because I lean towards the pantsing end of things. A lot of times I don't even know what my subplots are going into the book. So they surprise me halfway through. And then I have to go back and, weave them in a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I both hate and love that feeling of like tearing open a spot in your story to stick a subplot in. I always feel like I'm doing a lot, but it's also so frustrating.
Sometimes it's easier than others. Like sometimes like there's just like is an opening for it, and sometimes it's like this is gonna ruin everything.
Yeah.
This is going to break my entire book structure to try and
Well, actually, something that I thought I'm currently thinking about something that Victoria Aveyard mentioned, because I follow her on a bunch of platforms, and she mentioned something on writing in the Red Queen series, how in kind of any scene, if you feel like it's boring or you feel like it's filler, but you need to have that scene, like you need to have two characters talk about something. You need to have them talk about conflict instead of just having them standing there and being like, I think this. Oh, I think this. Oh no, you're wrong. Have them do something. So I think that's a really good point to weave in plotline. So she was mentioning how she had two characters have to have a conversation, but I think they were just like sitting down at a table, but then she made it so that I think one of them was like in the bathhouse or something. So it's like this whole other level of vulnerability. And then you're seeing like, I think it was also to like show off like his trauma at something. So it's like this, like you're building all these things. And so you're like, it's trauma. Yeah. With subplot. There you go. There's a whole other subplot. But just like, that's like a way that you can work your subplot in. It's like, okay, you have to have these characters having an argument. We'll have them have an argument while they're also trying to uncover this secret. And then that like works kind of to things that you need to get done. Like it's like a hitting two birds with one stone. Like you get the intertwinement. Is that a real word? I don't know.
We got
it is now.
Exactly. I'm an English major. I absolutely know this. With my full English major authority, I'm saying like you can kind of like intertwine a bunch of stuff together and make it work.
Crazy Foxy said, I just finished removing a subplot that my beta readers blasted. Not fun, but necessary. Oof. I hate removing things. I did have a slide with a few common problems you might have with subplots. That way you can keep an eye out for them when you're trying to self-edit your subplots. Too many or too few. Check the number of full subplots you've got going on. Again, you can always play with the numbers, but 2 to 3 is the standard. And if you're going to be over or under, just make sure everything around the story is supporting that. 2, too much space between. In your read through, does anything seem to come out of nowhere to you? Like, in essence, does too much time pass between mentions of your subplot? Number 3, subplot arc. Does your subplot have an arc? Like the main plot, your subplot should have its own rising action, climax, and falling action. Number 4, is your subplot character driven? Who is making everything happen in this subplot? Kind of a sub comment I have on this is your main character too conveniently stumbling upon this subplot? Overheard conversations might work once, but if your character is overhearing more than one important conversation and their profession is not spy or something, it's probably going to make readers raise their eyebrows, be like, oh, convenient. And 5, take a look at the climax. Which characters are present or play an important role in your ending? Calculate how many times you see them throughout the book. If part of your plot twist at the end is that a character has had a secret, a useful skill, etc., do you have at least a couple moments earlier in the book that at least allude to this? Plot twists are great, but for it to be really effective, some particularly astute readers should be able to pick up on the clues. Even if you're hiding it so much that most won't, you should have some people who are able to predict it.
Emma find it.
Exactly.
I'd be like so suspicious of everything in books now because like it'll just be like this one offhand comment or something, and I'm like, is that important? I don't know.
I am always so guilty of like picking up on one tiny world building detail and spinning something in my head that is a full subplot that does not exist.
My favorite one is like 2 characters had similar eye cover colors. I'm like, they're siblings. But like the series, like it was the first book in a series, and I never was able to find like the next book, so I don't know if that panned out or not.
I'm sure there are lots of other ways to self-diagnose subplot problems that I've left out. If you think of anything that you like to do to help figure out if your subplots are working, please let us know in the discussion section or in the comments if you are watching this after the fact. I put a note at the halfway mark of my notes to remind people to like and subscribe, and just blew right past it. So please like and subscribe if you like us and want to be subscribed to our content. I had one other exercise planned, but I think I'm just going to call it here because we are 20 minutes over. I will give you the exercise, though, in case you are feeling particularly subplot inspired and want to keep going. That exercise is subplots collide. Work on a scene where one of your subplots intersects with the main conflict of the story. Think about the characters on page and how they can play off each other, as well as what them interacting can reveal about the characters and themes. So definitely take that one home and work on it. Like I have mentioned throughout the chat, links to both these slides and my notes for the chat, which are essentially a full transcript of what we've talked about, are in the description box, as well as links to all the books I've mentioned. Does anyone have any final subplot thoughts?
Only that you've done an amazing job at this workshop,
always,
and we thank you very much.
I'll definitely be coming back to this in like various points in my next plotting adventures and editing adventures.
Yeah, I really like putting together the workshops because I feel like it's an opportunity to dig really deep into topics in a way that isn't typically done on a free medium like YouTube. Sometimes it just sucks trying to find really in-depth workshops and it being hundreds and hundreds of dollars, which I get. A lot of them are like worth that amount of money when they're being run by the people who typically run them. But yeah, it's really fun making one that you can go in depth all on your own without paying like $500. Yeah, let us know how you're feeling about subplots. Missy Kate said this has been so helpful, especially since you're using Lord of the Rings, since I'm revising a 100K Middle-earth fan fiction. Amazing.
Wow.
Damn, girl.
We have a topic next week. It is
Movie night.
Is it movie night? Oh my god.
Already?
I could be wrong, but it is the last.
It is supposed
Sunday.
to be, yes.
Okay,
Oh god, it's
next
already
week
the
is movie
18th.
night. I'm gonna watch some movies this week, and I hope you will too. Our movie night discussion topic are the Fear Street movies. Is the Fear Street movies? We are talking about all 3 of the Fear Street movies out now on Netflix. The 3rd one just came out. I've heard good things about the 3rd one and questionable things about the first 2. So I'm very curious to watch them. Again, those are available on Netflix, and we do have the next several live chats scheduled out on our YouTube channel. So if you want to see what we've got coming up beyond the movie night discussion chat, definitely check us out. We are also on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter sometimes, at WordNerds Vlog. And you can also go to wordnerdsvlog.com to find a database of all the videos we've done in the past. So yeah, please like and subscribe despite what Emma's baby is trying to persuade you otherwise.
So you were filming in front of a live studio audience.
Yes, the live studio audience hates us. He's like, no, please stop. So yeah, we will see you all next week, same time, 7:30 Eastern time for our movie night discussion. Thank you so much for an amazing chat. We love you all and hope you have a wonderful week and that all of your subplots prosper. Bye.
Bye.